Hey guys, it's Newman for The Punisher, Season 1, Episode 2, Two Dead Men, and I was definitely looking forward to this episode. As you guys know, I really enjoyed the first episode. I didn't love it, but I still thought it was a very solid introduction to the character. And this episode, I thought was just a little bit better than the first one. I thought we had a little more stuff with the characters that I enjoyed. We got more of the character of Micro. We got more of an idea of what the show is actually going to be. And if this is what the show is going to be, I'm definitely all for it. I really am enjoying the show so far. But let's just get into it. I definitely do want to talk about it. And I love the way this episode starts off because we start off in the past and we kind of get a sense of how Frank was, before his family was killed. And how was Frank? Well, he was really just an everyday guy. I mean, he's telling his son, Frank Jr., a story about two dead men who fought and killed each other. He says that the story is nonsense, but it's not stupid. They're on the ferry and see the Statue of Liberty, and Frank's daughter, Lisa, asks if he's going away to fight for liberty. And when Frank Jr. says that Frank is going away to kill lots of Ajays, Frank slaps him and tells him to never say that again. So it's obvious that, maybe he was just a little bit racist. You definitely do see that here, but he's very firm in that is definitely a demeaning term, and he does not want his kids to carry on that. So I really enjoyed this. Like I said, I thought it showed us who Frank really was, especially someone who is so demented and so volatile. It really does give a character the nice sense of humanity, and we saw that in Daredevil, but we didn't really see it in flashbacks, and that's something I really do love, is they're really deepening the layers of Frank Castle, and I'm definitely all for that. So he sits on the ferry in the present day. He remembers when he was there with his children, and when the ferry arrives, he goes to a diner and sits at a booth that gives him a view of a auto shop across the streets, and he reads an article by Karen Page. Yes, that Karen Page, who I was really surprised wasn't in the first episode. She was conspicuously absent. I didn't understand why she was gone, but she's talking about a murder-suicide in Little Italy, and the payphone rings. The waitress answers it. She then calls Frank over, saying that the caller described Frank in perfect detail. Frank takes the phone, and the caller turns out to be Micro, who is setting himself up to basically be the villain of the season, who says that he knows who Frank is, and Micro asks if Frank got the disc that he left for him at his house, and Frank confirms that he did, and Frank then invites Micro to come down to talk about it, but Micro then figures that it wouldn't work so well. He tells him he has to understand why he can't kill him, and then they'll meet, and he leaves the diner, runs into a nearby alley, and he enters the neighboring building, draws a gun, runs up to the roof. There's no sign of Micro, but a phone is hanging from the AC vent with a mirror, and a flashlight is trained on it. There's also a note telling Frank not to disappoint. Micro then waves him from the diner roof and walks off, and this was such an intriguing opening. There's clearly a lot we don't know about Frank, and there's clearly some involvement with Micro. This is not a character that he's unfamiliar with. Micro knows a lot of details about him, and I'm definitely interested in seeing what really does go down here. So later, Frank dreams of Maria kissing him and then being shot in front of his eyes. And again, you can just tell that, I've said before, he's a man that's full of nostalgia and memories, and everything kind of has some sort of remembrance to him. And he wakes up in his apartment, he looks at the photo of his family, and then plays Micro's disc, and it shows a man questioning Ahmed while masked men in uniform surround them, and Ahmed insists that he's not a terrorist, and the interrogator tells one of the soldiers to kill Ahmed, so you can tell that also is very much on his mind. So Frank goes out, unaware that Micro is watching him on the nearby surveillance cameras, and he goes to the support group room and tells Curtis that Micro is coming after him, and Curtis insists that he would never give Frank up. Frank wonders if he let anything slip to anyone hanging out there. He describes what Schoonover told him, that Frank's family was killed because of something he did in Kandar, and Curtis wonders what Frank was into. And Frank finally tells him that there was a group of soldiers that the CIA used for interrogation and assassination. And again, this is something that we did not know in Daredevil, and Maria and the kids realized what Frank was doing, and Frank worries that he might have been the reason why his family was killed. And if that's the case, this makes him all the more interesting, because not only is he a man full of memories and full of regret, but he's also a man full of guilt that maybe he might have been the one to kill his family. Maybe all these people that he's been going after, maybe it really is just his fault. And I'm very interested in seeing really where that does go, because that is definitely a very intriguing narrative. And again, it's something that we didn't get on Daredevil, and I love the way the show is doing that. So Even though this episode was still, like I said, better than the first one, that does not mean that Dinah is any more interesting. She still is probably my least favorite element of the show. We see Dinah and Sam are walking down the street. Dinah talks about how people chose to forget. She says the easiest thing would be for her to forget what happened to Ahmed, and tells Sam she got a tape showing that American soldiers killed Ahmed. She figures that Frank and Schoonover were among the soldiers but masked, and someone stole the tape from her, and she figures that Carson was ordered to keep her away from the case, and says she found Billy Russo, who is actually in Frank's old unit, and I'm hearing this character is going to eventually become Jigsaw. No, not Jigsaw from Saw. This is a completely separate entity, but if that's what they're doing. I don't know much about the character, so I can't really say, but Sam warns her that Carson won't let her talk to Billy, but Dinah isn't really impressed. So later at ICE, she approaches Carson, confirms that he was in the field, and she asks to get some physical training with the unit, and suggests that they organize something in NYC with a private contractor. So he agrees, tells her to send him a proposal, and we then see Karen. She's walking down the street when a homeless man asks her for change, and it turns out to be Frank, who calls her by her name. She realizes who it is and asks why he's there, and Frank asks to talk to her in private. So Karen then takes him to her apartment. He says that he had business that he finished. He tells her that someone knows that he's still alive, and she insists that she'd never tell anyone. And I really love seeing Karen on the show. She's such a well, fleshed out character, and, Defenders, she just didn't really have much of one, so I'm glad to see this is kind of making up for that. At least, in my opinion, it definitely is. So Frank asks her for her help to find Micro, that he said that they're both dead men, and he gives her a bundle of flowers and tells her to put them in the window when she has something, and he'll call her. So as he starts to go, she hugs him, says it's good to see him. He tells her it's good to see her, and then he leaves. So at the bulletin, we see Karen tells Ellison, it was cool to see Ellison again, that she's looking for an unpublished article about a computer hacker named Micro. Ellison demands to know who the source is, and Karen avoids his question. So the editor says a conspiracy theorist and Stringer brought in a story about an analyst who was leaking stories, and he decided not to run the story because the Stringer had no evidence. So then Carson came by and told Ellison not to pursue it, and he warned if they ran the story, then it would interfere with his story, and he offers to give her the story as long as she doesn't think he's a sellout, and then leaves. So you can tell this is a story that they very much kept under wraps, but he's finally giving to her, and it finally seems like they're getting to the bottom of things, and I really love the way this is developing. So Micro's then in his workshop. He's watching a video of his wife and 2 children, and when his son Zach talks about their father David and how he would have let him go to a movie, and his mother Sarah says he doesn't get to use the memory of David, who has been gone for a year, which this is very interesting. I don't know. I mean, I'm assuming they think that he's dead, which he's obviously not. So I'm definitely very intrigued by this character, and there's some really interesting stuff with him here. So Dinah then trains with a private contractor, Anvil, on a mock exercise with Sam, and afterward, Billy Russo comes over and introduces himself, and Russo is essentially very similar to the character that Barnes just played in Westworld. If you remember Ben Barnes, when he was in Westworld, he was just such an asshole, such an egotistical type character who really just thought of himself, and that's very similar to who he's playing here. He explains that it's in his operation, offers to give the IC agents more training. Dinah asks where they are now, and Billy says they're mostly in Iraq and Afghanistan, and Carson then watches on the surveillance cameras as Dinah says that she was in Afghanistan recently, and Russo says that he was there as well. Dinah asks what unit he was in, and Carson comes in, interrupts them. He reminds Dinah that she's out of Kandar and leaves, and he invites Dinah out for a drink to talk more about her time in Afghanistan, and Frank then meets Karen next to the river. She asks what he's going to do if he finds Micro, and she says that she wants to tell Frank as long as it doesn't get someone killed, which, again, that's very similar to what we saw in Season 2. She does still stick by her morals. She doesn't want to kill anyone, and he insists that if Micro isn't dangerous, he has nothing to worry about from him. As long as Micro isn't set on killing him, he's just giving him advice. He's not there to kill Micro, which I do like seeing. It's showing that Frank, he's not completely careless in who he kills. He's very, he's very methodical with that stuff. He knows very well who he wants to kill, and I love that about his character. But he threatens to walk, and Karen gives him the unconfirmed story about Micro leaking covert information. His real name is David Lieberman, and officially he was shot and killed by Homeland Security, trying to escape arrest, and Carson shut down the story, so it never actually ran. So Frank admits that Micro is very much scaring him and thinks thanks Karen for the story. She asks when she'll see him again. Frank wonders if she wants to. She says she cares about what happens to Frank, even if he doesn't, and tells him be careful before he walks away. And that is the last we see of Karen in this episode. I'm sure we're going to see her again. Deborah Ann Woll is billed as a main lead in the show, so I think we're definitely going to see her again. So Sarah's then pulling into her driveway, and Frank accidentally walks in front of her car, gets hit spilling his coffee. Sarah gets out to help him out. Micro then watching his surveillance cameras. He realizes who Frank is, gets a gun, and gets into a car to drive to his former house. And this scene I really love because it provides a lot of context into the Liebermans, and especially when it comes to Sarah. He goes inside, washes up, he gets a call. He removes the battery from the phone that Micro left him and goes out, and he thanks Sarah for inviting him in. He notices a photo of David with his family, and Sarah says that David passed away a year ago, and you can see that Sarah, she basically is under the impression that David is dead, and she's very similar to Frank in that way, where she's basically had a very significant loss, and he offers to leave, but she thanks him to finish the coffee she gave him. She breaks into tears and says that sometimes things just bring back her loss, and he looks at the photos of David with his family and then says that he lost his entire family and understands how she feels. And Sarah says that David died doing something very brave and very stupid, and when she goes between being very proud of him and figuring that he was selfish. And, we can tell that while Frank's intentions were basically just a reconnaissance mission and to gather information on the Liebermans, we can see that he really does seem to care about her, and he really can understand what she's going through, and it just provides this really deep understanding of Frank as a character. I really enjoyed seeing this scene here. It very much put us into his worldview, and I'm interested in seeing where Frank and Sarah are really going to go. I think these two are really going to form some kind of bond despite what he may think of Micro. I think he's going to put that aside and maybe form a bond with Sarah, and I'm very interested in seeing where we do take this in future episodes. So Micro pulls outside. He tries to call Frank. There's no answer. Micro then cocks his gun. He starts to get out. Sarah escorts Frank out. She opens her garage door to pull in. The door jams and Frank offers to take a look at it. After a moment, she agrees. So back at his base, Micro watches Frank on his surveillance cameras. He gets the garage door open, and that night back at his apartment, he cuts off his beard and looks at his family photo. And I'm glad that he got rid of the beard because, it was working for the character, but I was not looking forward to an entire season of, him looking completely unrecognizable. So he then tosses his things in a garbage bag and leaves, and Micro's watching him on the surveillance camera. He tracks him via his gates, and Frank walks with a lip, and soon he drops it, evading his watcher, and Carson returns home. He pours himself a drink. A masked Frank attacks him. The two men fight until Frank knocks Carson out, and this scene was so well done. He ties Carson to a chair, demands answers about David, and Carson works at his bonds. And this is understandable because obviously Frank knows that Carson was instrumental in the cover-up, so he beats him until he says that David was a traitor and killed arresting resistance, and he shoots him in the knee and figures that Carson had David killed and was working with Schoonover. So Carson gets free, he grabs Frank's gun, tells him to put his hands behind his neck. He rips off Frank's mask and realizes who he is and says that tonight is the night that Frank is going to die. Now, you know very well he's obviously not, but Carson says they knew exactly where to go to get Frank in the park. They create enough dead bodies that no one would look too carefully at a single one. He pulls the trigger only to realize the gun is unloaded, so he grabs him and breaks his neck, and you can tell Frank just pretty much thought of everything. He even thought of the fact that he might try to kill him, so he unloaded the gun. So Russo then takes Dinah to a cheap bar for drinks. She talks about how she had unfinished business in Afghanistan. She asks again who he was with, and then admits that she knows that he was with Marine Force Recon in Iraq. And he figures that she came to Anvil so he could help her with her unfinished business, and says that soldiers can't question legality in the moment, and he invites her to ask her questions. She asks about Frank. He says that Frank was his friend and a lot of his kills were with Frank at his side. So these two definitely have a past, and Dinah asks if Frank got involved with drugs, and he tells her that he didn't, and the system let him down, and he admits that he doesn't have any family because he likes to travel light and figures that Dinah is single. She assures him that she isn't lonely, and he says that he isn't at the moment. So she gets a call and excuses herself, but says that she'd like to meet with him again. So Russo, it seems like, is going to help them out. He has a lot of history between him and Frank, and I'm looking forward to seeing really where this is going to go. But the DHS is then securing Carson's house. Sam then greets Dinah when she arrives. They realize that Carson was actually the victim, and Sam points out that Dinah is the ranking agent now. So the next day, Frank goes to the diner, and this was really surprising. I was very surprised that, he actually died in this first episode. I thought they were going to keep Carson around for a little bit, but he actually did die here. But the next day, Frank goes to the diner. Micro calls him on the phone that he left. Micro says he knows where Frank is, and Frank says that he changed his gate to avoid detection. The hacker says he wiped the feeds of the shooting clean after he identified Frank's gate and asks why Frank went to his home. And Micro says his family has nothing to do with it and that Sarah is only safe if she thinks that he's dead. So basically, it's very similar to Frank, where he had to do this to protect her, and Frank tells him that Carson told him everything and admits that he killed him, and says that Micro is to call him in 1 hour on a cell phone that he can reach him on. So again, he's not looking to kill Micro. He's not looking to even harm Micro. He just really wants his information. So an hour later, Frank tells Micro to meet him at a nearby bridge. When Micro pulls up, Frank calls him and gives him directions to a dock. Frank continues leading him around the city to make sure that no one is following Micro, and he finally sends him to a cemetery. Curtis watches Micro, reports the man isn't being followed. Micro realizes that it's the cemetery where he's supposedly buried and goes to his tombstone, and Curtis then steps out, says that Frank has Micro in his crosshairs. He tells Micro that Frank's is in the wind, and if Micro tries to find him again, then he'll visit Sarah. So Curtis walks off. Micro yells at Frank, saying he needs him. There's no response. He goes back to his car, drives back to his base in a warehouse marked hazardous, pulls into his base, pours himself a drink. Frank gets out of the trunk of Micro's car. He then walks into Micro's command center. Micro then bursts into laughter, realizing the whole thing was basically a setup, and Frank then punches him unconscious, peers at his prisoner, and that is the way this episode ends. So overall, guys, like I said, I definitely really did love this episode overall. I thought there was a lot of great stuff going on here, and it really gave us a lot of context into what this plot line is going to be. And if we're heading to a direction where, Frank realizes that maybe this all was his fault, that's really intriguing. It's different from anything we've seen before with this character, and I'm definitely on board with that if they are taking it in that direction. What I also really loved about this episode is, like I said, it really gave us more insight into Frank's worldview. He's not just gonna kill anyone, he's not just gonna kill the first person he sees. He's going to kill them if he finds it necessary. If he doesn't, then he'll work with them or he'll torture them. He'll do whatever he can to get information out of them. And it's clear he's not looking to harm Micro. He just really wants information out of him, and Micro's being very secretive and he doesn't know why. So is Micro going to end up being the villain this season? Probably. I do think we are heading in a direction. I thought C. Thomas Scott's character was going to be. I thought for sure he was going to be the main, threat of the season, but he was taken out so early, and I was very surprised that they went in that direction. So I do think that Micro is probably going to take his place. I thought, like I said, I thought C. Thomas Howell was going to be the main threat, but he obviously isn't. So I'm interested in seeing really where that's going to go. But I also really liked what we got here with, Russo. I thought Russo was a very intriguing character where they really are taking him here. He obviously has a lot of history with Frank. Him and Frank have worked together for a long time, and I'm looking forward to seeing how things do go. It looks like he's actually going to help Dinah, figure out what she's trying to, which we still don't know what Dinah exactly is pursuing, what exactly she's trying to prove. If she's trying to prove that Frank was responsible for killing Ahmed, which we know he is, or what she's really trying to do, but I still am not a huge fan of the character. I still am not really liking where Dinah's going. She's just very bland to me, but Russo I do enjoy. I do enjoy what Ben Barnes is doing with this character, and I'm looking forward to seeing really where he does go. I also really like seeing Karen in this episode. I think the inclusion of Karen really did strengthen the show. It showed the possibilities of the show really does have, and any scene that Deborah and Woll and Jon Bernthal share together is pretty much perfection, because these two just work so well together. I mean, we've known this from Daredevil. We already know that these two have great chemistry. We already know they work really well together, and I'm looking forward to seeing really what else she does in this show. I mean, I'm sure she's going to help him uncover what's going on, but it's clear that she wants to publish this article. She wants to finally, make this known to the world. This was something that Carson covered up for years. But now that Carson's dead, now there really is no reason for her not to pursue this. And I definitely really like where this is going. So I'm interested in seeing really where, if she is successful with this, if she has success with possibly helping out Frank here. Remember, she said she's going to help him as long as he doesn't have a malicious intent, which we know most times he does, but he's not willing to kill anyone. So we'll have to, I mean, he's willing to kill, but he told her he's not going to kill anyone, so we'll have to see really where this does go. I'm very interested in seeing how that team up really does go down. As far as Sarah, I really love the scene between Frank and Sarah because these two have a very deep understanding of each other. To Sarah, her husband is very much dead. She's had to deal with this for over a year now, and in reality, Micro is very much alive. He's still out there, and I like the way that Frank is using this sort of as leverage. Like, he's using this against Micro. At least to me, it seems like, you know, look, if you're not going to give me the information, then I'm going to make your wife know that you are very much alive and let her know what you've been up to, so he can really use that against Micro, and I'm definitely interested in seeing where that's going to go. But I do think that Frank genuinely does care for Sarah. I think despite the fact that this was meant to be, like I said, just leverage against Micro, I do think that he genuinely cares for her. I do think that they do have a deep understanding of each other, and I'm interested in seeing really where that does go, because they're very similar characters. You know, Sarah, she thinks her husband's dead. Obviously, he's not, but she's had to go through a lot of the same things that Frank has, and like I said, I'm definitely interested in seeing really where that does go. I think it's very interesting overall, and I'm interested in seeing, like I said, how all that really does develop. Overall, guys, I really did love this episode. There was a lot of great stuff going on here. The plot line is extremely intriguing. I'm looking forward to seeing really what this is all about. This is one of those stories where we thought we knew everything. You know, we knew about Frank Castle, that his family was killed by these external forces, and now he's going after them, but now we're realizing that he might have been instrumental in the death of his family. Maybe he had to cover up something. Maybe he had to do it to protect himself. We don't really know what the reasoning is, but I'm sure we're going to get into all of that very soon. All of this is extremely intriguing, and I'm very interested in seeing where the rest of the show is going to go. And I am definitely going to give this episode of The Punisher, Season 1, Episode 2, Two Dead Men, a B+. So over, guys, from this episode of The Punisher. Let me know what you guys thought of this episode overall. Left your thoughts in it. I absolutely loved this episode. I'm very interested in seeing where the show is really going to go. But that's my review. Hope you enjoyed. I'll see you guys in my next video, and I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.